Why, hello, YouTube. Welcome back. This is BalorMage again. And today, we've become a spreadsheet gamer. I haven't actually launched a single map today. After the news post today, we decided to open a spreadsheet and start doing a little bit of math. So what we're trying to work out here is how much exactly loot has been nerfed by. Just generic loot from League Mechanic mobs in your maps. So what's important is there's a few things that I want to get into before we start going through the numbers. One, our old League Mechanic bonuses, we do not have specific numbers for. So we don't know where most of these League Mechanics drop on this table, which is why the table is so long. We do know that the range is between 1,000 and the best estimate we have is about 10,000. I've gone up to 11 just so that we have a chart that goes that high. I suspect nothing was at 11, but I'm not positive. We do not have these numbers. These are not hard numbers. All of these are estimates, and we don't know where each League Mechanic falls on this chart. What we do know is that several League Mechanics were at least up this side. And we know this just from results of hundreds of thousands of super juiced maps ran, hundreds of thousands of hours played by many juicers. We know there are some that are up this high. We don't know exact numbers, which is why there's an entire chart covering 1,000 to 11,000, so we can see where and how bad the deficit would be at every interval. What we do know is that the new numbers were given to us by GDG. We got told in a post that the new multipliers will be 2 to 3 times. So it'll be 200 on the low end, 300 on the high end. So these are solid numbers we were given, and these are estimated numbers. Now, there are a few things that this doesn't involve. This entire spreadsheet does not involve what they have given us back. All right, so we're not counting our arch nemesis rares now dropping what I'm going to call loot goblin style loot, where you get the correct combination and you get a bunch of stuff. This is not counting the, I think it was 25% more currency that's going to drop over the whole game, or the 33% more uniques that are going to drop over the whole game, the buff that just happened. We're not counting any of that. We're not counting what they gave us back. This is only what they took away. So these numbers will look extreme, and they are, but it's to show what the deficit is between what we used to be able to get and what we get now as a baseline. So this gives us some rough numbers upon what the new reward structure has to give us back to get back to the same amount of rewards we were getting before, and it gets quite extreme. So with all of those in mind, let's go over our spreadsheet and what all of these numbers mean. So we went over these, which are the whole set of old League Mechanics. We've got our map quantity plus Atlas passives little chart here. So this top column is just a white map thrown into a map device with no scarab, no Atlas tree assigned at all, no quantity, no 8% quantity on the thing. This is baseline white map thrown in. And then we have 1.8, which is meaning an 80% quant map. Now, when I say 80% quant, I don't mean the map itself is 80% quantity. I mean the finished number when you enter a map is 80% quantity. That's what that represents. So that's your fortune favors the brave, maybe some Aziri fragments, and your Atlas passive tree. This is roughly the equivalent of Alk and Go. Then we've got 2.2 as a multiplier, which is, these are now decently rolled maps. Like you've put chisels on your map, and if you alk it and it hits like 55 quant, you're gonna scour that and look for like 70-ish plus, and you've got like a full Atlas tree, but you're not really juicing or looking for super high rolls. You're just looking for a decent roll. And then we've got 2.8, which is your properly rolled maps. These are maps that are either rolled really well or are like Vald to 8 property maps. These are where you end with 280% quant in the finished product once it's in your map, which is these are insanely good maps. So we've got from white to insanely good. Most Alk and Go players are going to sit around here. most more experienced players who roll their maps a little bit but don't go crazy with them are going to end up on this tier. So we also have our quant bonus and party bonuses, which we're able to change on the fly, that change the whole table so we can see what's happening here. So for the numbers in this video, I'm going to use 6,000 as the number that I'm saying. It's somewhere in the middle on the low end. We do know some are higher, we do know some are lower, but we're going to have a look at what happens to our raw loot and how much has to be made up. So single player, no quantity is what we're on here. Our old league mechanics, when they existed in a map, the total after having a map that's decently rolled would have been 13,200% quantity increase. So this is like a blight or something like that. The rewards that would come from the pump at the end, not from the reward tiles, would have something around the vicinity of 13,200. The new system, if we look over here, gives us a quantity increase of about 660% instead of 13,000. And that is in the mid-range here. Now that is quite the large deficit. This is a lot of missing loot. All of the loot we're supposed to get back has to try and make up for this, right? All the stuff we're supposed to get from arch nemesis mobs almost exclusively has to try and make up this deficit, which is huge. This is just a one-player party. Everything gets a lot worse when you go up to a two-player party. When you go up to a two-player party, you get 50% extra loot. The more times we throw multipliers on this, the worse the number gets. So now we're looking at just you and a mate in a map, no quantity, no, you're not like a dedicated party. This is just you and a friend playing your own builds in a map. Now we're looking at a deficit that's quite large. We're going from your average league mechanic there being 19,800% increased quantity in its finished product to 990% quantity, which is very low. Now this chart here is our character bonus, so like quantity. So we've got quite a few options, like you get 20% quant, or we're gonna say you put on a little bit of quant and have like 50% quant on your character, which is not quite like min-max quant farming by any means. It's just putting a little bit of quantity on. Now the numbers start to get ridiculous. In our decently okay rolled maps with not that much investment, we're looking at what used to be 24,300 total quant that is now 1,200 total quant. Now we're going to look at the extreme versions where we go up to full 6-man parties and we put on our quant rarity culling maximum juice level. And we're still going to look at the mid-range result. The mid-range result for league mechanics. When you do this with a full party, we used to be getting 71,400% increased quantity for league mechanic mobs. We are now getting, in the best case scenario, 3,500% quantity for league mechanic mobs. That is a massive number. The more you invest, the worse this number gets. What we've left off this spreadsheet is the use of scarabs. So for instance, if you were farming divination cards, you would be using, in a party like this, you'd be using winged divination scarabs, which are 250% more. So we would have to multiply these numbers by 3.5, 100% for the base, and then an extra 2.5 for that. So these numbers just get worse and worse and worse the more you invest. So to explain why your generic Alcan Go mapper isn't feeling it as much, you should probably still be feeling it, but you won't be feeling it as much as the investors. If you're still progressing through the Atlas and you're not in your juice stage yet, the difference won't be that noticeable because things that are reward tiles basically stayed the same. And reward tiles, boss kills, and anything guaranteed basically stayed the same. So that already covers when you're just alching going and when you're on like this tier and you're just like alching maps. That already covers at least half of the loot that you get from a map. At least half, probably more, but at least half is covered just by that. And then you've also got the new arch nemesis rewards, which are not included anywhere on this spreadsheet, to try and make up the difference. It is only the league mechanic monsters that you're suffering this. We've gone from 9,000% quant to 540% quant, which is huge. But since that only affected half of the loot in your map, that deficit is a lot smaller. And since reward tiles got buffed and arch nemesis is giving you quite a bit more loot in this early progression stage, it is still seems to feel relatively close. I think most people in the AlphaGo have noticed it be less, but not less enough that it's causing a huge problem. But your even moderately experienced player is going to end up down on this tier where they're rolling maps and putting league mechanics in, and this is where it is just going to start to get worse and worse over the course of the next week or two as people finish their atlases and enter their levels of juice, which is not all the same as mine, but the more you start putting in, the less you're going to get out comparatively. These are the numbers that they have to make up in essentially just arch nemesis loots. So what this has resulted in their attempt to make up for the deficit of loot on the floor, these essentially loot goblins now exist, which are quite hard to kill. They're your arch nemesis mobs just invading everywhere, and once every now and then you'll get that correct combination of arch nemesis that is going to be very rewarding. You'll get one that drops a lot of uniques that might be rare, or you've seen screenshots and videos going around of like full juice parties dropping 50, 60, 70 divines on the ground all at one time. That's when they hit that correct loot goblin. To do that, they've gone through potentially 100 or more maps and had almost nothing drop. There is no longer that consistency for it. So Alcon still probably okay. Oh, but moderately juiced maps in a casual player, moderately juiced maps for like a casual player once you get to the end game, which most casual players aren't even in the end game yet. We understand that. But once you get there, just your moderately juiced casual gameplay, roughly speaking, 50% of the mobs in your map belong to previous league mechanics. This used to be a lot less, but they very recently gave us an atlas tree that let us invest in the league mechanics, and we end up with a lot more of those league mechanics, specifically the ones we enjoyed. And so now it looks like just your low to moderate investment casual player is going to have half of their mobs in their maps affected by this change by these very, very high numbers. And all of that loot is trying to be made up in essentially almost just arch nemesis, which is insane. Absolutely insane. We do have a lot to back up this spread of numbers. We do have a lot of data from very, very, very experienced juicers that back up that a lot of the league mechanics are somewhere in this range. This range here, like 6,000 to 8,000, is where the math works out at what Snap and MP's team were running. So we're looking at like, the most efficient juicing a full party can do. The average of those league mechanics will end up somewhere in that range. Again, we are just like guessing at where each individual league mechanic was, because we don't know how much going into Alva did, or Beyond did, or the Blights, or the Abyss cracks. We don't know what their quantity bonuses were. We only know which ones were the most rewarding to run based on results. So these are all just estimates. These can't be used as hard numbers, but it does give us quite an idea of how much less stuff is dropping purely just from killing mobs in a game that is essentially a loot-based ARPG. The loot from just killing mobs and the idea of just adding more raw monsters to your map to increase your drops has become not a viable or rewarding option in any way. At this point, with these current changes the way they are, what we have left for mapping is basically just hunting reward tiles. We're hunting reward tiles and we're hunting what is essentially loot goblins, except they're harder to kill, which is the correct form of arch nemesis mobs. This entire thing and making this entire spreadsheet has made me very sad. We will be linking all of these in the description. You won't be able to edit them, but you will be able to make a copy and then play with these numbers however you like. But this entire thing has made me very sad. It has meant that investing mapping is just not really a thing. The solid rewards map to map of getting a return, not viable anymore. We might still even find that full party quant long term is still even profitable because 1 out of every 30 or 50 or 100 maps drops one of those really good arch nemesis modifiers where you get the correct combination and like 70 divines drop on the ground. But this becomes a very, very big problem when your dopamine hit is potentially days apart. And if that happens for juices, how much is that going to affect more casual players who might need weeks between their big dopamine hits now, because we're fishing for those correct reward loot goblins to happen? This is a direction I don't like. I do think that when you go up to max quant and quantity, seeing numbers like 154,000% increased quantity, which is like the top end theoretical, this might be the absolute min-maxed version. Even as a maybe, these numbers are too high. Like, all of these numbers are too high. And I agree from like a philosophy standpoint that these numbers shouldn't be that high. Something had to happen. And the idea of trying to normalize them all, I'm absolutely on board with. The execution, the numbers are insanely off. The greatest thing that we're going to see happen here is how much this affects divination cards. Divination cards are going to be insane. Almost every high value divination card is going to be significantly more expensive. There's no way to make up that deficit with arch nemesis. So divination cards are an insane thing. But that's my spreadsheet. That's how much we actually lost. I do want to keep in mind, I'm going to say this again. I know I already said it. I'm going to say it again. This does not count anything they've given us back, right? So the numbers are not quite this extreme. This is not showing us what they've given us back. This is not showing a representation of arch nemesis mobs. This is not showing a representation of the loot tiles that have been buffed and all of that. So what we have here is just a chart showing us what's been taken away and how much those new reward systems that they're giving us would have to return to compensate us and put us back at the same spot if we wanted to, which I don't think is something we want. I personally don't like the idea of having to run X amount of maps looking for my loot goblin to give me all the rewards for the previous X amount of maps all at once from one mob, with the potential that somebody more casual than I am isn't even able to kill that mob. And if you're not able to kill that mob, your loot goblin that had all of the loot from the last 10 maps just goes away and you don't even get that reward. The length between the dopamine hits hurts me. Everything about this hurts me. I am sad to have made this spreadsheet, and I am sad to have shared it with everyone. All links will be in the description of the video. and I will see everybody next time.